A hardened existence demands that you stop treating your mind like a trusted advisor during moments of pressure, because the untrained mind will almost always argue for safety, ease, delay, and escape when discomfort appears. The body says stay in bed. The mind says tomorrow is better. The nerves say avoid the difficult conversation. The ego says protect yourself from embarrassment. Fine, let them speak. Then move anyway. Discipline is not built when the body feels powerful. Discipline is built when the body feels resistance and still obeys the higher command. That repetition changes something fundamental inside a man. He stops viewing discomfort as a stop sign and starts viewing it as a proving ground. Over time, the nervous system adapts. The difficult workout becomes normal. The hard conversation becomes survivable. The pressure that once triggered panic becomes familiar terrain. This is why serious people often appear calm inside difficult situations. They trained there. They entered pressure voluntarily so many times that chaos stopped feeling foreign. Most modern men are overstimulated, undertrained, emotionally reactive, physically soft, mentally fragmented, and spiritually exhausted because their entire environment rewards immediate comfort while punishing delayed gratification. Every craving gets fed instantly. Every moment of boredom gets anesthetized through noise. Every difficult emotion gets escaped instead of processed. The body becomes addicted to ease because ease is available 24 hours a day. Then these same men wonder why they feel anxious, unfocused, and hollow despite living more comfortably than kings from previous centuries. Comfort without discipline creates fragility. The nervous system weakens because it never experiences meaningful resistance. A difficult task feels overwhelming. Silence feels unbearable. Delayed gratification feels impossible. Responsibility feels heavy. This is why a harder path becomes necessary. Not because suffering itself is noble, but because challenge sharpens human beings in ways endless convenience never will. The body requires resistance to grow. The mind requires pressure to strengthen. Character requires friction to become trustworthy. Look at how elite soldiers train, and you begin understanding something most people never learn. The goal is not merely physical performance. The deeper objective is adaptation under pressure, sleep deprivation, exhaustion, cold, uncertainty, repetition, stress, decision-making under chaos. The training rewires the nervous system until difficult conditions stop producing the same emotional collapse they would produce in untrained people. This principle applies far beyond combat. The entrepreneur building something meaningful operates under uncertainty repeatedly until uncertainty stops feeling paralyzing. The athlete trains under fatigue until fatigue no longer controls performance. The disciplined man wakes early enough times that the body stops treating early mornings like punishment. Exposure changes reaction. Repetition changes identity. The average person stays trapped because they never expose themselves consistently to the environments that would reshape them. They keep negotiating with discomfort instead of adapting to it. Then ordinary life pressures feel catastrophic because the system remains psychologically untrained. A hardened existence is not about aggression toward the world. It is about ending weakness toward yourself. That distinction matters. Many men perform intensity publicly while remaining privately unreliable. They speak loudly, they posture, they talk about discipline, masculinity, ambition, and power, yet behind closed doors, they still negotiate with every craving, every distraction, every emotional impulse that asks for control. Real strength appears in private. The early workout nobody applauds. The focused work session without dopamine rewards. The refusal to betray standards when nobody would know the difference. The decision to stay disciplined while tired, lonely, frustrated, misunderstood, or emotionally drained. That is where identity is forged. Public performance means little if the private system remains weak. The body knows the truth. The mind knows the truth. Self-respect grows from evidence, not image. A man who repeatedly keeps his word to himself develops a level of internal stability impossible to fake because the nervous system trusts him. Pain becomes useful once you stop interpreting it emotionally and start interpreting it informationally. Fatigue reveals conditioning. Discomfort reveals weak points. Fear reveals where growth is being avoided. Repetition reveals character. Most people spend their lives trying to eliminate pressure completely, never realizing pressure exposes exactly what still requires development. The exhausted workout shows whether discipline exists without motivation. The difficult conversation reveals whether honesty survives tension. Financial pressure reveals spending habits and emotional control. Failure reveals whether the ego can tolerate reality without collapsing into excuses. A serious man stops asking how to avoid struggle and starts asking what the struggle is attempting to teach. That shift changes everything, because suffering without meaning creates bitterness, while suffering connected to growth creates transformation. One destroys, the other sharpens. Human beings can endure enormous difficulty when the difficulty points somewhere valuable. They collapse when pain feels random and meaningless. Weakness compounds quietly. Skip one workout, and the body becomes slightly easier to negotiate with next time. Delay one difficult task, and avoidance gains another piece of evidence. Ignore one standard, and the nervous system learns that discomfort can overrule command. This process continues daily until the man no longer feels in control of himself. He becomes reactive. Emotional states dictate behavior. Motivation dictates discipline. Convenience dictates standards. Then, life starts feeling chaotic because the internal hierarchy has collapsed. A hardened path reverses this. Structure begins governing mood instead of mood governing structure. Standards remain active despite emotion. The body obeys routines instead of cravings. Over time, this creates something most people desperately lack: internal order. The external world may remain chaotic, unfair, uncertain, and demanding, yet the man himself becomes steady because his identity no longer changes shape every time pressure enters the room.
People move through life with the unconscious assumption that time will continue extending itself politely around their indecision, their distractions, their delayed ambitions, their emotional hesitation, and their endless negotiations with comfort, which is why they waste extraordinary amounts of energy on things that would immediately collapse into irrelevance if mortality stopped feeling abstract for even a single afternoon. The ancient samurai understood something modern people spend decades trying not to think about. Death clarifies, not philosophically, biologically. The moment a human being truly understands that time is finite, the nervous system begins cutting away noise automatically. Petty arguments lose weight. Artificial social performances lose importance. Endless distraction starts looking grotesque. Fear begins reorganizing itself because the greater fear is no longer embarrassment, rejection, or discomfort. The greater fear becomes reaching the end while realizing most of life was spent emotionally sleepwalking through meaningless cycles. Bushido forced men to confront this reality before life forced it upon them violently. Preparing for death each morning was not about pessimism. It was psychological sharpening. The samurai understood that a man who accepts mortality clearly becomes far more difficult to manipulate through comfort, fear, temptation, or social pressure afterward. Modern culture trains people to avoid thinking about death almost completely, as if ignoring the reality of mortality will somehow protect them from the emotional discomfort associated with it. Everything becomes designed around distraction, endless entertainment, endless stimulation, endless consumption, endless noise loud enough to keep existential awareness buried beneath dopamine and routine. Yet, something fascinating happens when people receive a terminal diagnosis. Study after study on terminal patients reveals a dramatic neurological shift. Priorities reorganize almost immediately. Tension sharpens. Emotional tolerance for nonsense collapses. Old resentments suddenly feel pathetic. Delayed dreams suddenly feel urgent. People stop pretending they have infinite time because the illusion has been ripped away from them. The nervous system begins conserving energy for what genuinely matters. Conversations become more honest. Relationships become more intentional. Regrets become painfully visible. This reaction exposes something uncomfortable about ordinary life. Most people already know what matters. They simply behave as though they have endless tomorrows available, so the truth never receives full commitment. The samurai approach solved this problem by rehearsing mortality daily until clarity became a permanent operating system rather than a temporary reaction triggered only by catastrophe. Imagine waking each morning and genuinely asking yourself whether the actions planned for the day would still deserve your attention if you knew the sun would not rise for you again afterward. Most routines would collapse instantly under that question. Endless scrolling disappears. Petty gossip disappears. Fake social obligations disappear. Cowardly delay disappears. Half-hearted effort disappears. You stop speaking vaguely about your goals, because vague effort suddenly feels insulting in the face of limited existence. You stop treating the body carelessly, because the body becomes a weapon requiring maintenance rather than a container for comfort. You stop avoiding difficult conversations because silence no longer feels safer than truth. Mortality strips away illusion faster than motivation ever could. The samurai understood that a man who remembers death regularly becomes far more capable of living intentionally than a man hypnotized by the fantasy of endless time. Look at ordinary modern behavior through this lens and the absurdity becomes almost painful to observe. A man wastes 3 years avoiding a conversation that would take 15 difficult minutes because temporary emotional discomfort feels larger to him than irreversible lost time. Another spends decades trapped inside work he hates because uncertainty feels more frightening than slowly suffocating spiritually. Another delays building his body until weakness becomes normal because immediate convenience outweighs future consequence in his mind. Another sacrifices his deepest ambitions for social approval from people he secretly does not even respect. Why? Because death still feels theoretical. The nervous system behaves differently when it believes time is abundant. It tolerates distraction. It tolerates mediocrity. It tolerates compromise. It tolerates emotional cowardice. Once mortality becomes psychologically real, tolerance for waste collapses almost overnight. The samurai trained themselves to access this state deliberately, rather than waiting for tragedy to force it upon them. The first layer of this philosophy is simple. A man who truly accepts mortality becomes harder to control through fear. Fear works best on people emotionally attached to comfort, reputation, predictability, and safety because those people have constructed identities around preservation. They protect themselves constantly. They avoid embarrassment. They avoid uncertainty. They avoid discomfort. They avoid truth when truth threatens stability. Yet once a man fully understands that death eventually removes every illusion of safety anyway, his relationship with fear changes fundamentally. Public speaking no longer feels catastrophic. Failure no longer feels fatal. Rejection no longer feels like annihilation. Difficult work no longer feels unbearable. The body recognizes something larger than temporary emotional discomfort. This creates a level of freedom most people never experience because they spend their entire lives unconsciously worshiping preservation over purpose. The samurai mindset reverses this hierarchy completely. Purpose first, integrity first, action first. Comfort becomes secondary. The second layer is even more powerful because mortality awareness reorganizes attention itself. Attention is life force. Whatever repeatedly captures your attention eventually shapes your identity. Most people allow their attention to be fragmented constantly because they believe more time will always exist later for the meaningful things. They scroll instead of building. They consume instead of creating. They procrastinate instead of confronting. They drift instead of deciding. The nervous system keeps postponing significance because urgency never fully arrives psychologically. Terminal patients often describe a strange clarity emerging after diagnosis because the illusion of unlimited time disappears immediately. Suddenly they know exactly which relationships matter, exactly which regrets hurt most, exactly which dreams deserved courage earlier, exactly which distractions stole years unnecessarily. Bushido trained this clarity intentionally. The samurai did not wait for disease to force focus upon them. They practiced focus daily by remembering that every sunrise could realistically be the final one. This matters because the quality of your life depends largely on what you repeatedly consider important enough to protect with your time, energy, attention, and effort. A man living unconsciously often protects trivial things with extraordinary seriousness while neglecting the very things that would actually make his existence meaningful. He protects comfort more than growth. He protects image more than truth. He protects routine more than purpose. He protects temporary emotional safety more than long-term self-respect. Mortality awareness rearranges these priorities brutally. Suddenly, the body matters because weakness wastes limited years. Relationships matter because unresolved resentment feels intolerable. Discipline matters because wasted time becomes visible. Truth matters because pretending feels pathetic when existence itself is fragile. The warrior mentality is not obsession with death. It is obsession with clarity. Death simply provides the sharpest lens available for separating what matters from what merely distracts.
People imagine strength through ancient images because ancient struggles look easier to respect. Swords, armor, battlefields, survival against visible enemies. The modern mind romanticizes those environments because the threat feels obvious there. Either you fight or you die. Either you endure or you collapse. Yet the modern world created a more deceptive kind of danger, because now the enemy rarely arrives wearing the face of violence. It arrives wearing comfort, convenience, endless stimulation, emotional escape, cheap pleasure, delay, distraction. The average man is not being destroyed by invading armies. He is being slowly dissolved by softness repeated daily until ambition weakens, discipline weakens, attention weakens, and identity itself begins drifting towards something smaller without ever noticing exactly when the collapse started. The battlefield did not disappear. It moved inward. The war is no longer fought mainly against external enemies. It is fought against the part of you constantly trying to negotiate lower standards in exchange for temporary relief. Softness does not announce itself dramatically. It enters quietly through repetition. One morning where the body obeys comfort instead of command. One evening wasted because discipline felt inconvenient. One difficult task delayed because avoidance produced immediate emotional relief. One uncomfortable conversation postponed because tension felt unpleasant. None of these moments appears catastrophic alone. That is why softness survives so easily in modern people. It grows invisibly. A man does not suddenly wake up weak one morning. Weakness accumulates through tolerated compromise. The body learns what standards are negotiable. The nervous system learns how quickly pressure can make you retreat. The mind learns that your promises can be broken whenever discomfort becomes loud enough. Over time, this creates a dangerous internal hierarchy where emotion governs action instead of principle governing action. Once that reversal happens, the person becomes reactive rather than deliberate. Mood dictates behavior. Fatigue dictates standards. Impulse dictates decisions. That is not freedom. That is psychological surrender disguised as modern living. A hardened existence begins with understanding that your greatest enemy is often not external resistance, but internal drift. Drift is dangerous because it feels natural while it is happening. The body becomes slightly softer. The mornings become slightly less disciplined. The focus becomes slightly weaker. The standards become slightly more flexible. The excuses become slightly more sophisticated. A man still functions. He still works. He still survives. Yet the edge begins disappearing slowly enough that he adjusts to the decline instead of confronting it. This is how irrelevance forms, not through one catastrophic collapse, but through years of gradual compromise until the person no longer resembles the sharper version of himself that once existed. Most people fear intense pain while completely underestimating the destructive power of slow erosion. Erosion kills quietly. A river cuts through stone not through one violent impact, but through endless repetition. The same law applies to weakness. Repeated compromise reshapes identity over time. Look at the modern environment honestly, and you begin seeing how aggressively it trains passivity into people. Every craving can be fed instantly. Every difficult emotion can be numbed through stimulation. Every moment of boredom can be escaped. Endless entertainment keeps attention fragmented enough that deep focus begins feeling unnatural. Food engineered for addiction destroys discipline around appetite. Social media creates constant emotional comparison and low-level psychological noise. Comfort becomes available immediately, while meaningful growth still requires patience, repetition, and discomfort. This creates a dangerous imbalance because the nervous system adapts to whatever it repeatedly experiences. If life repeatedly trains immediate gratification, then delayed gratification starts feeling emotionally painful. If life repeatedly removes friction, then ordinary effort begins feeling overwhelming. The result is a population physically safe yet psychologically fragile, emotionally reactive, mentally scattered, and spiritually exhausted from constant stimulation without meaningful direction. The first layer of this war is physical, because the body influences the mind more than most people understand. A neglected body weakens confidence, energy, emotional resilience, hormonal balance, and psychological stability simultaneously. This is why disciplined movement matters beyond aesthetics. Training teaches the nervous system how to function under controlled discomfort. Fatigue appears, yet movement continues. Resistance appears, yet repetition continues. Pain appears, yet structure remains. The body learns something valuable through this process. Discomfort does not automatically control behavior. That lesson transfers everywhere else in life. The man capable of training consistently while tired develops a nervous system more capable of handling pressure in work, relationships, leadership, and responsibility because the system has already been conditioned to remain operational while discomfort exists. Most people never develop this adaptation because they spend years escaping physical difficulty whenever possible. The second layer is mental, and this is where many men quietly lose themselves without realizing it. Attention has become one of the most contested resources on earth because whatever captures attention repeatedly eventually shapes identity. A fragmented mind cannot build anything meaningful. It cannot sustain focus long enough for mastery. It cannot tolerate silence long enough for deep thinking. It cannot endure boredom long enough for creativity. Yet modern life trains interruption constantly. Notification, video, scroll, noise, outrage, entertainment, dopamine. The mind becomes addicted to stimulation while losing the ability to remain still. This is why deep work now feels almost painful for many people. The nervous system has been conditioned for constant novelty. A hardened existence requires reclaiming attention deliberately because scattered attention produces scattered identity. The person who cannot govern his focus cannot fully govern his life. Excuses become dangerous once they evolve beyond obvious laziness and begin disguising themselves as intelligence. Weakness rarely says, "I am weak." It says, "The timing is bad." It says, "I need balance." It says, "I work better under pressure." It says, "I'll start properly next week." It says, "I deserve rest first." Some of these statements contain partial truth, which makes them more dangerous because the mind can hide inside them comfortably. This is why self-honesty becomes essential. You must learn to identify whether your reasoning is actually strategic or merely emotional self-protection wearing strategic language. A serious man interrogates his own patterns brutally. Why does the work keep getting delayed? Why does the body remain undisciplined? Why does the mind keep escaping into stimulation? Why do important conversations remain avoided? Behind most repeated problems sits an excuse pattern, protecting the current identity from pressure.